Are we sure we're recording?
Yeah, it's red. You can see it. It's
Are
running.
we sure we're in focus?
Well, I am.
Amateur. Where's your nice? Oh, you have the scarf on today.
Yeah. Virtual signaling.
Yeah.
Oh, and we're gonna talk.
Which virtue are you signaling? Though?
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
And we're gonna talk about one of my very, very, very strong suits, data.
Strong suits. Was that intended?
That's not. Yeah.
Okay. Yes, data. We're gonna talk about data. And we have some potentially different takes on this than maybe many other folks. And I think really our approach is just be a bit more freaking pragmatic about the stuff.
Yeah, I mean, everyone says they want to be data-driven or are data-driven. So we're going to get a bit into that. And actually the whole reason behind covering this subject is it's absolutely key if you want to be able to build a model at some point in time.
Yeah, and or if you just want to run a good company. Right, it's kind of both of these things are true, and I think there are multiple ways to use data. We're going to go into this. One of them, sure, an operating model, which we obviously think is super important. But many other reasons why data is important, and some stumbling blocks in the way there.
Yeah. So I, uncovered some pretty good notes for us today.
Well done, Mikko.
And I'm gonna thank you. I'm gonna use the first one really from the OG. Peter Drucker.
Yeah.
And he has this very, very, very famous saying that, you can't manage what you can't measure.
Yeah.
And I kind of said I really want to start pulling that one a bit apart.
Okay,
together with
sure, you start.
Well, okay, I can do that. It was kind of a tee up for you, but that's totally fine. So the thing is, there are things you can measure.
Yeah.
And there are things you can't. And does that then mean you can't manage it? No. Does it mean you shouldn't do the things you can't measure? No, it really doesn't, right?
No, that's right. I think in principle and for the 80-90% use cases or, situations, I think it's still a really solid advice, measuring the stuff that you want to manage. And then there are things where it's a little bit more difficult, especially our dear marketing friends kind of talk about this all the time. And my way of talking about that thought, by the way, is it's usually this demand gen. Hey, we're kind of running ads somewhere. There's no direct link between those two, but our direct traffic and our branded search goes up. So there must be a connection here somehow between the money we deployed and the outcome that we're seeing here. For me, it's again, I don't think you can connect those two things causally and logically fully all the time. So that is kind of the, hey, you can't measure this thing. But I kind of see it as, think about air 100 years ago or 200. I don't know. Air was around. Everyone needed air. If it wasn't there, everyone is dead.
Yeah.
But no one could measure it. No one could be like, oh, I exactly know how much air is in front of me or whatever. That was only figured out later. And that basically for me means all this demand gen stuff, don't treat it like air, but have the method, the metaphor in mind that maybe eventually we'll be able to measure it, and then we will probably fully know that there's a connection between those two.
Yeah, and I guess the question is then really there are so many things you can measure.
Yeah,
what really matters? What should you be measuring as a business? Because you have data for everything.
Yeah. Well, I mean. You should, obviously you should manage and measure your cash in the bank account and your cash flow. And, let's skip over these things, kind of the finances. You should obviously kind of have on a good control. And usually you end up having that because there are laws governing this. So you can't just not have that managed well.
Winging it.
Yeah. And really then the other side is, let's just say, product and your funnel. I don't think we will deep dive into the product so much today. Also don't think we are massive experts in that area specifically, but let's just say you want to measure what's going on your commercial side, right? And there you really have the funnel itself, how that's performing. You have the micro pieces, meaning sales reps and campaigns and projects maybe that are running. You want to probably measure those, usually for performance management reasons, right?
Yeah.
Hey, is this person working out? Is this campaign working out, and so forth? And I think, in addition then to, the micro, then you have the funnel as a macro, and then you probably want to have efficiency pieces around it as well, right? And those efficiency pieces then are basically, they're called unit economics. So, CAC payback, customer acquisition cost payback, that's usually something that you want to measure.
Yeah.
And, if we take this as an example, the question there is then you really, how deep do you want to go with that? Because everyone on this planet can measure CAC payback. It's really not that hard. And simply because both of these numbers are finance driven, and finance usually has their shit in order. And basically it is the cost that you spend on sales and marketing in a quarter and the revenue that you newly acquired in that quarter. You kind of put those two into a ratio and boom, you have your customer acquisition cost payback. Where it gets tricky is, well, what if I want to know, US versus EMEA? What if I want to know inbound versus outbound? And in order to take that next step, which you really need to in order to, be able to improve your CAC payback, just randomly cutting across the board will just leading to randomly reducing your revenue. So you really need to kind of peel back the onion just one more step in order to figure out, well, which channels are not working well, which channels are working well. And really, I think unit economics and CAC payback and, lifetime value and all of these fancy metrics, bringing both the finance side and the funnel side together, I think that's kind of the master class of measuring and what you can use data for.
I mean, we could almost do an entire episode on the metrics that matter. I think that's for another time. One of the things that keep coming up that I think we should be addressing is clean data.
Yeah.
This is something that surfaces again and again and again. And I know this because I have, in the communities I'm in, on LinkedIn, it seems to be a recurring topic. So I wanted to dive in a bit on this one. Is it really important to have clean data? And is the issue really that big?
So, and this might be, some people might be thinking this is controversial. I don't think it's so super important to have super clean data. I think there are probably different use cases. And for some, you want to be very certain that the number that you're talking about is correct. And then you have other use cases where it's totally fine that you have 80, 90%, correctness. And by the way, 80, 90%, that's, everyone is there. I haven't found someone that is, far off from that measure. And the reason why I know is, on the one hand side, I have never met anyone that had perfect data or that even, claimed to have perfect data. I have met a bunch of people that said they have terrible data. But, really looking into this and, seeing kind of how you can still use it, there was no one ever that we couldn't work with because the data was too shit, right? And that kind of tells me that there's a bit of a double standard going on in the community about, what perfect data means and what you really actually need in order to run a good business. And perfect data for me means everything is 100% across the board all the time. Every single piece is synced across multiple, tools perfectly. You have, maybe you have a single source of truth in Salesforce. Some people might be laughing about that, yes, and maybe then you have a CDP, a customer data platform, where that maybe is the case, or you have built something in between and so forth. Massive amount of work for, what's the output potentially? Well, even for high-level tasks, you might end up with like near perfect data. But do you really need that? You need that, and we're going to get into this a little bit. You need this for purposes like, letting go of someone. Yeah. You sit down with a rep, you say, hey, you made so many calls, you only booked so many opportunities, we told you 5 times, and now it's the end of the rope. And then, what's really, and, that happened to me as well. What's really terrible is then the rep on there said, well, but that number is wrong.
Yeah.
I booked actually 9. And before that, I booked 10. And, now you're letting me go. This, that is a problem that you need to avoid. But do you really need to know on a team level of, let's stay in the argument of an outbound team or SDRs, do you really need to know on a team level that it was a 110 or 115, right? Do you really need to know on, a VP level, whether or not the VP marketing in HubSpot says 261 MQLs and the VP sales in Salesforce only sees 259 MQLs? It doesn't matter. It simply doesn't matter. And then, having all of those things line up, that would be 100%, right? I totally would agree with that. But it doesn't matter for most of the conversations that basically all of us are having every single day.
Yeah. So I think the point is really I think you had an example of if you're running a quarterly business review with a team and you're presenting a number and you go, so this is how we did. And whoever you're running the QBR with goes, well, that's not the number I have. You will in most cases find that it's the same kind of trajectory they're on. So don't get fussed about, that slight variance. So
I think, sorry to interrupt you. I think it goes even a little bit further than that. I think there's even a little bit of a evasive maneuver in there by those execs that basically are trying to throw you off or throw the conversation off by pointing out those things. And it usually works really great. It's like, hey, this number isn't right. And you say that in the first 3 slides of the QBR, and suddenly everyone is like, well, if those numbers aren't right, then we probably can, skip the QBR now because, what insights will there be?
Yeah.
And I think number one is very quickly when that happens, and it will happen to you. There's just nowhere it will happen to you, is to basically shoot it down and focus on, first of all, what's the difference really? What are you having? What are we having? If there's a 50% gap, you have a problem, right? You have a problem, and there's probably no way around that. If the gap is, 10, 15% or smaller than that, then just skip. Usually what you will find is that the trend will be the same.
Yeah.
Right? And then, and, especially the VPs or the execs that know that they will come under fire in this QBR. And, I'm not a fan of ambushing or something like that, but, they might, try and, ask some questions about the validity of the argument. And my reply back is then, well, is your data also showing that you're declining by 20%? Yes. Well, then we should discuss that. Whether or not, this is 5% plus minus on either side, doesn't matter. The trend is still minus 20%. And I think we all agree that that's really the problem here, right? And then you kind of overcome this, the data is the problem. Yeah.
So the other thing I heard Dave Kellogg talk about is the, most contentious QBR is usually the marketing one. And it's because there's so much data you can pull in. And you need to kind of find a balance for what to then focus on, as to your point, right? If you're off by 20%, you're off. And you need to find some very clear points where this is the focus. And I've been in a scenario quite, in the past, working with a data analyst or a data scientist, really digging into a problem and keep on going until you almost get to a point where, the data doesn't make sense anymore. And the data analyst knows it. So when should you start pushing back? If you're sitting in revenue operations or in the data team, when should you start saying, okay, whoa, let's slow down here now?
Yeah. I think there's a difference between one-off deep dives and, recurring, we're going to look at those numbers. And I think the reason why Dave is saying that the marketing QBR, MBR, those meetings are terrifying, he meant it predominantly from a CEO founder perspective, because it's like all of those numbers, and I don't know all of those numbers, and I don't know what's important. And he basically kind of cuts it down. It's like, hey, just did they create pipeline? Yes or no?
Yeah.
That's really
that's all I want to know.
That's really the question here. For other purposes, though, I think the recurring meetings should be centered around pieces of data, you could call them metrics, that are leading towards revenue. That's how I would kind of look at this. So what would that be? It could be, as for some teams, it could be traffic on your website. Is that traffic number going up? Is the right quality of traffic going up? Is branded search and direct going up, or is paid social going up? Whatever. So this is an important piece. If especially if you're SMB, you will kind of look at this a lot, because you will probably look a lot between traffic and conversion, and you will have conversion rate optimization going on and so forth. So that number needs to go up, otherwise the leads won't go up, right? If you're a bit more mid-market enterprise, we'll start looking more into leads. And then, why do you look at leads? Well, because leads is highly indicative of how many opportunities you will get.
Yeah.
By the way, pro tip, separate hand raiser leads, so demo requests, trials, quote requests, from non-hand raisers, which are, webinars, white papers, and so forth. Focus on these things and, stay at first at the volume metric level. How much traffic, how many leads, how many opportunities, broken down into the regions, broken down into some of the different streams. and use processing steps, for example, conversion rates or lead time between those stages, and later on in the opportunity stage, ACV, so average contract value, use them as a second order to explain some of the issues that are going on. Otherwise, you will confuse everyone. Focus on the volume stuff, and then as a next layer, peel back the onion and say the reason why we are behind here is because not the volume piece, one level up, is broken, but the processing between those is broken, right?
Yeah. And I think one of the points you made recently was, so yes, you need to focus on revenue, but that happens very late.
Yeah.
Usually. And you need to have an indicator or step before that where you can start seeing, or we're trailing off course here. Let's now go and do something.
So I think a lot of folks talk about, hey, lagging indicators, leading indicators, and I know, and I listen to this and it's like, okay, cool, but in the end, revenue matters, right?
Yeah.
The way I would try and have everyone kind of think differently about the leading indicator piece is when you see something going off on the leading indicator side, you still have time before it hits revenue, before everyone sees you screwed up.
Yeah.
That's how I see it. And in some cases, you might have 3 to 6 month time of either fixing it or preparing the organization that something is not going to work out.
Yeah.
Recently talked to a VP sales, like medium company, and he was walking into Q4 and basically had to tell the organization that they're not going to hit Q4. Because he already knew, right? So he was in Q3, he saw the opportunities, and Q2 was soft, Q3 was a disaster. So what do you do with the gap? You put it on Q4, but obviously Q3 really weak opportunity generation, and then you walk into Q4 and maybe you can get a decent Q4 in normal ways, but not in this one, right? And those are the leading indicators that you should be leaning into in order to fix and course correct without anyone noticing, which is fantastic.
Yeah.
Or preparing the organization. Hey, there's maybe we don't need to hire that many sales reps.
So this is where there's something you can measure and you can effectively manage it at the end of the day.
No, exactly. And I also think, we're talking about data and data quality. I think there's one step before that actually, which is, do you need to measure all of that stuff?
Yeah.
Do you need to collect, all of those pieces of information? Many times, especially, and we have this theme of, hey, RevOps, ditch the tool talk. Many times I feel there's oh wow, we have the Salesforce thing. We can measure everything and anything. And now we go off and try and achieve that. And let's start a big war with the AEs and the SDRs, that they need to put every detail in, and then we can maybe measure
Please fill in this field.
And the result is, first of all, they're not going to put it in. So that's an issue right there. And second of all, even if they did, would you really be able to, pull something useful out of that? That's really my question. And many times you can actually probably skip half of the stuff that you want to look at. And the way I would approach it is, what do you want to use it for?
Yeah.
If you don't have a good answer to that, skip it.
Yeah.
And the other way around, which is the I'm falling in love with the data approach, which is let's just measure everything, store it, and then we're going to look back and see patterns and all exciting stuff. I was part of that camp for a really long time. We measured everything.
Yeah.
We stored it, and guess what? We never looked at it. We never went back and was like, ooh, let's look into those call stats from 2 years ago of that SDR. No one cares about any of that stuff 2 weeks after it's over, right?
No.
So really be purposeful in the data that you collect. Then it's also, first of all, less data in general, but also easier to maintain, easier to get to those 80, 90, maybe even 100% of data quality. And then really use that for a purpose that ideally, in our mind, should be revenue driving as a revenue operations professional.
I think sometimes also, so there's two ways you can take this clean data conversation at the end of the day. There's the, reporting insights trends piece. There's also, we want to automate things, and we do in fact need somewhat clean data in order to do that. So, if you had a close one and you want to try and resurface them over time. And so I think there's the tactical side that probably also takes up a lot of mental capacity, but those are tactics.
I think you're right, though. I think for some of these things, you simply need better data in order to try and create a process and automate something like that. And I forgot the specific example here. We had something around churn and customers, and we wanted to use some of the data to maybe even, send emails automatically. And then we realized, hey, this is so high stakes to send an email like that to a customer. We don't feel comfortable sending something like that out unless we know 99% that the data is correct.
Yeah.
So there are a couple of things, and you're right, on the automation side where you want to have perfect data, but that does fall into my way of describing them in terms of purpose, right? If you have a strong purpose, cool, go, let's do that. And again, I recently saw a post, some RevOps linkfluencer, someone. Not myself. Was kind of talking about, hey, don't start a RevOps project unless blank, and then everyone should fill in, right?
Yeah.
And it was so hilarious. It was, I don't know, 30, 50, I was jealous, but 50 comments or something like that. And everyone was like alignment, and, you need to kind of have buy-in and these kind of things. I was the only one saying, revenue impact.
Yeah.
Don't start the effing project if there's no revenue impact.
Yeah.
And I think this is the same approach you should probably have with your data. If you can't see how to cut costs, and cutting costs, I usually see this as you can deploy the cost somewhere else and maybe generate more cash from that. Or if it helps in other ways to generate revenue, then consider maybe not doing it.
Yeah. So what I'm thinking is we've talked a bit about some of the cases briefly where you need perfect data. And one of the things in the preparation was like, well, one of the places where we do need perfect data, obviously, is going to be in the board. When you talk with the board, and you're like, nope.
Just a comment.
Yeah.
Nope.
Like, actually, no, you don't need. But so, can you elaborate? Why is that? I was a bit shocked, to be honest.
So first of all, maybe you explain why you think it should be in the board.
Well, I think so. Conversations are going to be, hey, there's some proposals. There are some things we do need to discuss beyond just proposals. And for that discussion to be productive, we are going to need some data at the end of the day.
Yeah. So the truth about boards, they're usually very much removed from the actual stuff that's going on. The financial data, they don't really care about hundreds of thousands of euros. Sure, on a governance oversight way of, is the CEO spending it in the right way? But really what they're looking at is how much money is left on the bank account and how much more time and growth does that buy us.
Yeah.
And that measures in the millions, not at the hundreds of thousands.
Yeah.
And then when you go into funnel data, number one, sadly, many people sitting on the board don't really fully get it, and sometimes also don't fully care. I think there's a cool breed of VCs that have operating background and then bring this in, and that's helpful. And then there's a breed equally cool, I by now even think even cooler, of VCs that don't have any operating background, and they just realize that and just stay out of it. Yeah. I think that's a kind of good approach. And then on the funnel data, number one, how are they gonna cross-check that?
Yeah.
You can give any number, my friend, any number, and they will like, oh, well, that looks like a big number. And then you move on. And then even worse, and I've been doing this myself sometimes, you might either change the metric that you show to completely confuse them, or even worse, you change the definition of the metric without letting anyone know.
Yeah.
And that's why, on the board level, usually you end up with fairly fluffy numbers. I think everyone around the table understands that. Some of that is simply due to difficulty collecting this in time. It's always a scramble, those board meetings, and you need to send it out 48 hours before, and it never happens, and stuff like that. And then there's also just so little, let's just say, risk that some of this is wrong. I think where it does make a big difference is not when you're in the board, it's in the process of getting a new investor into the board. So when you go through a due diligence process, you usually have, depending on the size of the transaction, you have investment bankers on the other side. You have someone like BCG, McKinsey, Bain on the other side. You have finance teams where there's clearly their career depends on this on the other side. And yeah, they will be very, very accurate. And it's like, why is this number different than the spreadsheet that you gave us yesterday? And why did it change? Tell us exactly why it changed. That's a whole different level. That's a whole different level of a conversation. But usually in the board of directors and the reporting that's going on there, usually very low fidelity.
So when you go to the other side where you don't need as much, accuracy in the numbers, one of the things we've talked about is, building an operating model. Why is it you actually don't need precise data? Because don't you want to be as certain as you can about being able to produce, whatever revenue you aim for?
Yeah, sure. I mean, better is always better in that sense, right? I think there are two approaches. One is, what do you really want to get out of it, and what can give you that information without needing all the details? So one thing that we have actually discovered is you don't need to know all the specific MQL definitions and, opportunity, what is where, when in the stages and the funnel and all of that stuff. What you need is the pillars of your funnel. And depending on where you start, the pillars are traffic on Google Analytics, which is, being outlawed in Europe, apparently. You have unique users or something like that, I think it's called. Yeah. You know what? You can't change that definition. You cannot. So it's unscrewable.
R-rated, rated R, yeah.
It's unscrewable. Yeah. The same for lead created.
Yeah.
And the lead creation might still have, hey, is it a demo? Is it a white paper? Is it a webinar?
Yeah.
You can't really screw with the lead creation.
Yeah.
Because again, all of those are system fields. You will have a lot of fun playing around with the MQL stuff. But I'll get to that in a second. You can't screw around much with the opportunity creation in Salesforce and the date stamp and all of that stuff. You can't. Again, you will have attribution pretty quickly on outbound, inbound, and so forth. That's really then important. And then I suppose you could probably screw around with the opening closed won definition in Salesforce. I haven't seen anyone yet doing that though. It's like it's closed won when there's a signature and or when there's a PO or we got a verbal, that kind of stuff, but not, this means it now progresses to next stage or something. It's usually not that. Yeah. And then the last step of your funnel is revenue. And revenue by default is something, people have different definitions of ARR and churn and how you calculate that stuff. But at the end of the day, it's your money in the bank account. And it's to a degree, derivative of that is, what you're putting on your profit and loss statement. Usually people have this under control, right? So if those are your pillars, then now, filling it in between, you might have an MQL piece, and the MQL piece might just indicate some things, but it's really just a reporting on the lead stage, because really what you're talking now about is, lead to op conversion rate. That is fixed because lead creation, opportunity creation. Yeah. If you now insert a fluffy MQL piece in the middle, you basically have a drop of conversion rate from lead to MQL and then MQL to op. If you redefine the MQL, you're really just changing the conversion rates between lead to MQL and MQL to op. And, the list goes on for tweaks like that. And then really the important piece, which everyone has under control, are the different, we call it dimensions, so the segments that are important to you, which might be the different markets you're operating on, which might be inbound, outbound partnerships, and so forth, right? So whatever is important for you as an organization, what we found is also what you have managed kind of nicely in your CRMs.
Yeah. So I guess the point is there are certain areas where you just can't mess it up. What number is produced, you can believe in, you can actually use it, and that will get you far enough.
Yep.
At the end of the day. So don't get too fussed about, data quality. Don't overwhelm yourself with hundreds of data points. It's back to the purpose, as you said. What is it you are trying to achieve?
Yes.
And then go and do it.
And be pragmatic about it. And, does getting from 90 to 100%, does that change the impact on revenue? If that is true for you and your organization, go and spend that time. if it's not true for you and your organization, then don't spend the time. Spend the time on something else.
Yeah. Something that drives revenue.
Wonderful. Nice. This was a bit technical, actually. Wow.
Yeah.
I didn't know I had it still in me, Mikkel.
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah.
But it was nice. And we have, a new sign kind of illuminating our studio, which is wonderful. Gives a good vibe.
We can light up your revenue engine.
Yeah. Come on. That's a bit corny. You need to work on your marketing chops, my friend.
Let's see about that. Okay.
But thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Mikkel.
Thank you, dear listener.
Thanks
Hope you
everyone for
enjoyed
listening. Yep.
Bye.